This is like this. It's kind of like purplish on the top. Not that big. Purplish on the top. And a bunch of purplish white spots on it. It's kind of really big for the bottom. This big.
All right, well, we'll invite everyone to drop back to your seats. We can kind of open it up for discussion for if folks have questions for Owen.
I have a very basic question to start. Why is it like finfish and then other titles it's just what's finfish?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, and honestly, it's a bit of jargon, you know, you can say fish, you can see fin fish. I don't really know very many fish that don't have fins, and it pairs nicely with shellfish, and that's probably about it, you know, you can say fish just fine.
Does it include like skates and?
Yeah, I mean, if they're there, we're interested in them, yeah. Sorry, I took a bite of the cookie, just as I had an idea.
The timing was terrible, I'm sorry. No, I cut you off in the middle of the stack. It wasn't right.
So anyways, you know, I'd love to have a little bit of a discussion here, and I threw some figures from the benthic habitat map report in this presentation, just so we have kind of a foundation to build on, but it doesn't have to be the foundation, but it is a good one, you know. So these are some of all of these numbers are stations that Agnes had sampled previously with the benthic grabs. You know, these are some of the sites that we might consider either revisiting with different gears or going back to and looking at seasonal changes in invertebrate abundance with the grab samples. So that's one thing we have to look at. I'll put that back up at the end. You know, we do have this wealth of information to build on. You know, we have the side scan sonar mapping and the bathymetric mapping that we've done. If you haven't taken a look at the report that the friends have on our benthic habitat mapping work, I encourage you to do so. You know, Agnes, of course, counted thousands and thousands of these little critters here. Lots of shellfish seed among all of the other critters in there. You know, we have these habitat types, the habitat classifications that you're able to do when you merge the sonar data, the benthic critter data, the bathymetric data. So we have some things to sort of build on top of here. And again, I'm not a benthic ecologist, that's sort of Agnes's wheelhouse, but we do have some information, you know, from the pure science side to build on. But really, you know, this is a great time to think about, you know, where we go from here. You know, you saw some of the tools that we use and the techniques that we use, some of which I feel strongly we should use here if they're practical, just because it's nice to have that comparative thing. And I think, you know, the seine, the trawl, the dredge, you know, those are things we'd love to repeat here. I really think it would be great to do some underwater video as well, but if folks have ideas of either things that you saw that you don't think would be good to do here, or conversely, things that you think might be a really good tool to use, I'd love to hear it. If you have, you know, specific things you want us to focus on in terms of species or area, I'd love to hear those kind of concerns as well. And just any general questions you have would be great.
What's the cost of the survey, and has the town agreed to underwrite any of it, and how much of the funding have you secured and is still necessary to secure?
I can that one for you. The component cost is about $70,000 for the research. Not mistaken. That's all hard. We raised about $35,000 so far. The town is committed. We are very close to actually seeing that, but it's been to $15,000 project. So we feel very confident that we're well on our way getting this put together. We're looking forward to doing another harbor cruise in the fall. Very successful fundraiser for us last September. We're looking to, through the generosity of the Whale Watch, put on another event like that, and we're looking at some other options.
You know, to have a fundraiser, it's not that difficult. I don't know that you need to
rent a boat and have this, and let's have a cookout at the beach with a campfire and a keg of beer. I mean, it's the same.
This, building. So, that's just ads and elephants, and it draws, I mean, to get 200 people to come, the way we did to that cruise, it's hard to do an event that it's gonna have so much attraction to it, and then we have it as basically no cost. We just provide the food, things like that, and most of what we give to that cruise is donated by food businesses, but the whale watchers, they make it all possible. But you're absolutely right. Just getting people together.
To what extent is sport fishing data be a factor in this study?
And, I think it'd be really useful, and I'd love to talk to a few folks about what kind of information they have and what they think we should be looking at in there, but yeah, I think, the data itself is really valuable, but just sort of the observations and the what and when and where, to help us think about where to put data in underwater camera systems, for example, things like that. I've thought a little bit about maybe getting a few rod and reel fishermen together and doing some rod and reel surveys. Those are a little tough to do in a standardized way because everyone fishes a little bit differently, and it's kind of hard to do the same thing repeatedly over time, especially if you're not catching anything. It's so counterintuitive. Make you use the same bait the entire season, even though you know better. It's really hard. We've thought a little bit about ways to incorporate, sport fishing, recreational fishing into the science in different ways. And, I'm open to all kinds of ideas and suggestions, but at a minimum, thinking about where to sample, where to put our underwater camera and bait systems. I think that's going to be a really useful tool. It's used in a lot of other places, and I think we really want to look at some of those faster moving mobile species that we're not going to get in a beach seine or a trawl. Rod and reel is a great way to get information on those. And when we did the work at Pleasant Bay, we talked a lot to fishermen. We go dock to dock and just talk to folks and get some basic information on what was there. But to build on that and do something more systematic, I think would be really interesting. We're not doing enough of that. The underwater camera work, I think, is really promising because it's a very non-invasive way. It's a standardized way of doing things. I used to try to use a gill net, and it's really challenging for a variety of reasons. We have terrapins, we have boats, we have all kinds of things. I caught more sailboats from the yacht club than I did fish the last time I gill netted in Pleasant Bay.
Is water quality part of the study as well? Because it seems to me that has an impact on the fish that you're going to find.
Yeah.
So do you look at that as well, or is that someone else's job?
Yeah, so yes and yes, both count. So whenever we do a survey, we're taking things like water temperature, dissolved oxygen, those kinds of things. As far as like nutrient monitoring and things like that, I'd have to look, and I don't know if folks are aware in the room of what kind of other monitoring programs there are, because it would be really good to look at water quality monitoring. The center has a program as well, and I bet we have some stations in there, and we can certainly look at that data and incorporate it into our reporting. But yeah, beyond what the center does in there, there's other either town or citizen-based programs. I'd love to know more about them. Sure, they're there. Probably some of you are the volunteers that collect the data. But
APCC
of course,
reporting that the water quality is degrading, more and more degrading as you go farther west in Harbor, more and more over time. I don't know where they're getting this out.
some of it probably comes from us. I know we contribute a lot of our water quality data to the APCC for their wide assessments. But yeah, that's a great question. I'll look at and see what's available there, because if we have data that's being collected at the same time as what we're collecting, we can absolutely look at that, because I do think that's really valuable. And that's one of the places where around the Cape we're doing better, in terms of long-term monitoring. We do have some of these really wonderful data sets from places like Pleasant Bay, Nauset, and maybe Barnstable Harbor as well. I don't know how far back the data go, but I'll find out.
Which, just because this is kind of related, how does the work that you're doing here at Nauset, Pleasant Bay, you said Wellfleet Harbor as well, how does the bigger picture come together? And is there a goal for Center for Coastal Studies to do all the data on Cape Cod, or?
Yes, that would be wonderful. I think, of course, funding is a challenge to be able to do all of them, but I think having these sort of new baselines, especially for areas where there's some history there, is really useful. But then, going forward, what we'd love to do, when playing around with this a little bit for different areas where we have some data, we can kind of issue like a report card, the Buzzards Bay Coalition does in some of their areas for the eelgrass and things like that, where you can look at, a set of metrics. So when you do an inventory like this, you can kind of look at, okay, what are some of the more important indicators, based on our data, based on community input, what are some of the things we should be looking at? And can we use those to sort of compare by going forward in time and resurveying, not the entire big study, but some of these select species and select locations or select relationships or other environmental factors, and see how they're changing over time. And if you can do things like come up with relative metrics of ecosystem health and things like that. So we'd love to have something that we could apply to all the different embankments around Cape Cod. And I think we're starting to get closer to that as we do these kinds of studies. But that said, each place is a little bit different. It's got its own little quirks, and these places with these really dynamic and changing barrier reef systems that face the Atlantic are a little bit different than Wellfleet Harbor and Barnstable Harbor. So you can compare them to a point in terms of the biology and ecology, but you might have to look at different metrics in different places. So I think having some tools to look at ecosystem health, beyond just fish, beyond just shellfish or water quality, but really stitching all of this stuff together and going forward, that's kind of the dream that, that I have, and that scientists at the center have, is to be able to look at things in a more holistic way than we do now, and to do that going forward so we can see why things are changing and what's driving the change. Because sometimes we have these wonderful, very sound hypotheses of why something has changed in an area, but when it's time to show you the data, it's really hard to do that if you don't have data collected over time.
It seems like back in some of the back creeks up in the salt marsh, the Great Marsh, there's some, I wouldn't call them, there's some deep spots, at dead low tide. It seems like they're very important for harboring fish in between tides. I wonder if you could sample up in there to run scenes and wondering.
Yeah, I have to think about how to get out there carefully. I'm gonna look just over you all to show me some of those spots. That's one of the things we do. There's a place called Chub Hole up in Nauset that, only a few folks know where it is. It's tricky to get to, unless you know where it is. But, so things like that, having that local knowledge of spots like that are interesting, I think would be really valuable, because I don't know all of these spots. This is a place where I'm relatively new to working. Nauset's like my backyard, but here is not as much. That's why I'm here talking to all of you folks.
Just a question about money. Do you happen to know if those other sites were able to get foundation money to support their project? And
yeah, so Friends of Pleasant Bay, much as Friends of, and again, I don't want to speak out of school, as far as nonprofits go, that they did something very similar to what Friends of Barnstable Harbor is doing, which is, really looking at the community and raising funds from the community. The Nauset study was funded by the town, and that was really, they were so interested in the barrier beach dynamics and the changes there, that they were able to really elevate that level of importance for the town to focus on and fund. Wellfleet, they have the Herring River restoration and a lot of things going on there, so there's a big interest in supporting more work there, although funding remains a challenge for Wellfleet. Every town is a little bit different, every community is a little bit different. We partnered with the Park Service for some of the work that we did in Pleasant Bay and in Nauset. So, the places that are also part of the National Seashore, you do have that partnership there. But yeah, I read a lot of grant proposals and things like that, but the funding picture is a little less in my wheelhouse than the science part.
It's really impossible to find grants for this. I spent a lot of time trying to do it, and that was my experience. And I know, because I talked to Pleasant Bay back then, it was National Seashore Environment. And they were lucky because they had people that go, oh, great, $25,000.
Yeah, no, just to follow that, these are sort of like, they're like very place-based studies, and when you look at federal grants and things like that, they want to fund these sort of big geographical area, big impact study, which is great, but these are smaller scale, very place-based studies that matter to the people that live right around it, and they can be models for work that we could do in the bigger picture elsewhere. They have all kinds of value beyond the local place, but it's most important to us and our neighbors, and so I think quite often these very place-based studies are hard to fund. The feds don't necessarily want to fund that work unless there's some novel piece of it that really stands out. But, as far as what we're all trying to do here, it often falls on those of us who live here to support the wood.
Make it the claim sort of from your work now, just the importance of these places as nurseries. Because that, to me, seems like that has a bigger reach as well, not just local, but if it's nurseries that are feeding, fish stocks that are important out.
Yeah, I think it would be really interesting. Unfortunately, we know that there are these little fish that are here that get big somewhere else, but to scale that up to sort of environment, economical impact and, how many fish, that is where it really gets important to see. If you can tell me how many dollars that little tiny fish is, or that habitat is, how many fish it's producing and what it means, turn into dollar values. I think that's where you get some traction, but it is really tough without doing more science to take what you see at a small scale and extrapolate it out. But we all agree that nursery habitat's important, but it's challenging to quantify that. That's a good point. I think as we try to develop some of these projects, working with fisheries economists and things like that would be really valuable. But it is tough to put a dollar on that. At least, that's a little out of my wheelhouse as far as my expertise goes. But that's really, your point isn't lost there. That's good.
I see when I walk, I see squid eggs quite a bit. So they're there too.
That's awesome.
Some of the historical pictures of, we had inside Sandy Neck, there were weirs. And, it's 600, 700 pound tuna and herring, and it was just, it's amazing how plentiful fish were back.
Yeah, I'd love to, if anyone knows where to get your hands on some of those log books. I do a lot of work on the south side of the Cape with sort of the last of the weir fishermen. And, having the historic logs, and, it's really fascinating to look at species diversity and how it's changed places like that. But, I have a few log books from Cape Cod Bay, a little further to the east there, out in my neck of the woods in Brewster. But if there's anyone who has access to historical data from those fish weir log books, catch records, the state has some of it. I've got some of it that's really old, but it's sort of aggregated, like the whole area's landings. But if anyone knows of anyone who has some historic log books, I'd love to see those. It's so interesting when you can get out of that.
Right across the street.
Yeah.
Shipwrecks around Cape with researched over across the street.
That's a great idea, Bill. I was they're just library.
And Tales of Cape Cod. That's a lot.
Awesome. Oh, that's a perfect place to start. I'll take my clam card and go across the street. Thank you. No, that's a really good point. I'm sure there's a great historical society here too.
Yeah. So our blue mussels haven't thrived in the last 20 years. And some years we'll have big sets, and then they'll get an inch long, they'll all back. I don't find anybody that's been able to explain that here.
Yeah, in Pleasant Bay and in Nauset, one of the things we certainly see is a lot of predators. The sea stars will just kind of move right through and demolish a mussel bed. Bird predation might be a factor as well. Other predators, might be different in each place, but hard telling that. No, I'm going to be interested to dig deeper into that one. I'm sure. If you're an oyster farmer, maybe you're happy to see them go. If you're interested in harvesting them, maybe you're happy to have them there. But it'd be interesting to look a little more, because we see that in other places too. And the folks who harvest them, there are times when nobody seems to know why. To your point, whether it's a commercial dragger or some of the other scientists, we're not sure what happens there.
I was just curious. I'm a teacher. I teach in Plymouth, but I was just wondering if you have contacts like at Barnstable High School, where you could get students to do some of the work, labor, and also some of the tedious work too. Just that experience. Do you have that?
Yeah, we're planning some field trips with Mr. Ross's class already.
Already, good.
Yeah, it's a great place, and we go down to the one place that I've spent a little bit of time out here regularly over the years is adjacent to a lot of this, but get down over to Gray's Beach there. We bring the AmeriCorps there every year, do training, use the same nets. Brought students down there for years. But yeah, it's such a cool spot. So I think same sampling, especially when you have so many fish. And you know, you could do it from shore. That's a great way to get the students involved. So that's one of the places that I hope to have our high school students involved. But yeah, I'd love to talk to you more about other things you think the students could do. I think video analysis, I've got an all-star high school volunteer in my lab right now who helps us with a lot of our video data. But working with local students is absolutely something we want to do with this.
How do you put a video camera somewhere without it becoming, a navigational hazard or it becoming hit by people who aren't in the channel, i.e., there's lots of great places to put videos, but then I'm gonna run over and fish.
Yeah. No, that's a fair point. You know, I think a lot of it is, you know, it's not something we do on the first day. You know, we spend some time out there talking to folks and watching the boat traffic, watching where people fish. Thinking about where a safe place is to do that, where it's not gonna
But how do you
interfere.
mark it and how do you, like,
Sometimes we'll put a surface buoy on it. You know, the small pyramids we have a little surface buoy on them, so you can see that it's there. Sometimes we put them in a place, you know, like the edge of the marsh, things like that, where they're not likely to get hit by anything. But usually we put a surface buoy on them or some other way of getting to them.
and
But
they're around like a track buffer?
Yeah.
So that how much of the water?
yeah, so I've got all different size ones, and I can make, you know, I make them out of PVC and rebar and sash weights, you know, to keep them stable. And you know, it really depends on the area. I've got bigger ones that I've used in places that are more dynamic and get away with it. Having a bigger structure, I've got really small ones that can be this tight to the bottom. So we'll look at the areas where we think are most interesting and probably make them to fit. It's another great student project in building those things.
And also, I mean, just educating those boaters that are fishing, and that they're out there, right? I mean, that's maybe science or something, right?
Just
to
I'm
alert
easy
them?
to educate, but I don't make a promise about it. All the other, there are many people.
Yeah, you know, I'd love to set some up, you know, near some of the aquaculture grants too. I think, you know, the aquaculture grants are really interesting ecologically. So having some in there where, you know, that would be great. So I'll be talking to folks who work out there for that. And yeah, well, I'm so excited to get going. Awesome. Well,
What sort of time frame do you anticipate for the site?
you know, that's sort of, we talked a little bit, with John and Peter about timing. You know, we'd love to get going, basically as soon as possible. You know, spring is a great time to get started before it gets too hectic out there. We can kind of get a feel for everything. You know, maybe that's a smaller conversation for after this as far as the funding picture. When's a kind of a safe time to start? But you know, we're ready to go. You know, whenever we get the green light from the friends, and you know, we're excited to do it.
And you're expecting a 12-month study here?
Yeah, and you know, when we have a start date on the calendar, you know, we'll work from there. But you know, I do want to spend a little bit of time, as we're doing now, having these kinds of conversations. So that will continue as we ramp up. You know, then there'll be some time to work up all of the data, of course, on the back end as well.
Well, if there's any, reasonable at all, this council went in today in the harbor. Some of the, private brands and so pretty much things as well, so I think the harbor's gonna be ready very shortly.
Awesome. We're ready when you are. Well, thank you so much, folks. This has been really excited to get going on this. And you know, if you have more questions, I'll stick around for a little bit. There's some of my cards up by the front table there. Feel free to grab one of those. And yeah, looking forward to getting to work. Oh, well.